That is, two more papers are left. Before that, we'll have Professor J.P. Das invited lecture, and I deem it as a privilege to extend cordial invitation to Professor J.P. Das, Professor at Alberta University, Canada, for an invited lecture on consciousness, some perspectives on Indian psychology, from Indian psychology. We are fortunate to have such a very distinguished psychologist amongst us, and I request Ms. Sailaja to introduce the speaker.
Professor J.P. Das has obtained an honours degree in philosophy and a Master of Arts in experimental psychology. Welcome, sir. Professor J.P. Das has obtained an honours degree in philosophy and a Master of Arts in experimental psychology in India, as well as a PhD in psychology from the University of London Institute of Psychiatry, working with Hans Eysenck. PrEP and Cognizant were created by J.P. Das, the world-renowned Professor Emeritus of Educational Psychology at the University of Alberta, based on his pioneering past theory of intelligence. PrEP is effective and cost-effective if one considers the per-pupil cost factor, which includes, of course, personnel costs. The most expensive operation in a school is personnel. With PrEP, you have something that several children can use at the same time. Cognizant focuses on providing children with extended opportunities for enhancing early literacy skills. Parents may be confident that with such a good start, their child's future will be bright. Professor Das has authored literally hundreds of peer-reviewed manuscripts in his field, as well as numerous books and book chapters. He's published 250 research papers, many of which focus on efforts to redefine intelligence. He is an internationally recognized expert in the field of educational psychology, intelligence, and childhood development. In 1999, he was inducted as a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada for his scholarly contributions to the study of intelligence, and in 2004 was awarded an honorary doctorate degree by the University of Vigo in Spain. Das' scholarly research contribution focuses on cognitive processes and assessment and mental retardation and learning difficulties in children. Particularly noteworthy is his research on reformulating the concept and measurement of intelligence, which attracted national and international attention. Together with a colleague from George Mason University in the United States, Das has constructed the Das Cognitive Assessment System, an alternative measure of intelligence that helps in diagnosis of learning difficulties. This highly original assessment system was standardized in the United States and as well translated and standardized in Spain and Japan. It is increasingly popular as an alternative to the traditional IQ test. After Dr. Das retired from teaching, the University of Alberta appointed him Professor Emeritus of Educational Psychology and renamed the center, which he directed with distinction for 22 years, in his honor as the J.P. Das Developmental Disabilities Center. Thank you.
I'm still looking for my
Consciousness.
Give me one more.
Many perspectives.
Right. I said. Anything else? I should have tried it out before.
These are two PowerPoints, the others are all Word files.
Eh?
These are two PowerPoints, apart from that they are the Word files.
Yes, I had one that had better slides than this.
So this is a PowerPoint which is consciousness control self. This is a shortcut now.
No,
This is the one which is a shortcut. So consciousness.
Yes, that might be, but there's a more colorful one.
This is one.
more colorful than that. Let's see another one. May not appreciate this talk at all for you. I wouldn't at all mind if you leave. But you have to tolerate this for at least 40 minutes. If that's okay, then we'll go ahead. Okay?
Yes.
So, let's see. How do I start it? Oh, here it is. Sorry for the confusion. Now, this is on. Okay. Okay. All right. I work in this building most of the year, but for 2.5 months I am also in Bhubaneswar. I do several things, one of which is not at all really my primary interest, but it's a kind of courage and pride I took in writing the book on consciousness. Professor Rao was quite instrumental in encouraging me to finish the book, and in fact he wrote it. It contains a chapter on yoga as well as 2 chapters on mindfulness and 2 chapters on Indian theory of mind, which has Vedantic and Nyaya Sankhya system. I wouldn't be elaborating on those because many of you are quite expert in these areas. So rather I will concentrate on things that might be somewhat new and might really encourage you to think a bit more. So I go to consciousness right away, cognition, neuropsychology and consciousness. It has 2 foci. I am asking what's consciousness and what's the role of the frontal lobe. In case you do not know what frontal lobe is, you are looking at one that I have, which is here. It occupies 1/3 of the brain and it has no sensory or really motor areas. So in the old days, the neurologists used to call it the silent part of the brain, because it has no sight, no hearing, nothing in it. Just 1/3 of the brain is given over to nothing. But it does contain consciousness. So that's what I wanted to go on with. First of all, consciousness. We distinguish it from unconscious. As you know, when a person is in coma or in a vegetative state, God forbid some of your relations might have been in coma, does that person have any kind of consciousness? For all purposes, perhaps not. However, more recently, it has been found that even in coma or in so-called vegetative state, there are conscious strains in the person's brain, as you can see them from at least PET scan or MRI. Very clever experiments talk about these things, and I have written about some of them in my other book, which is in the last page of the handout, which is a book on cognitive planning and executive functions. I have brought in it quite a bit of consciousness, what's its use and how it can be used in management, as well as in this book itself. There's a fellow called Chris Frith who has kind of revived consciousness in the field of psychology, and he thinks that consciousness is there for a purpose in us, for a purpose. What's the purpose of this? He goes around the question several times during his book, and at the final stage thinks that the purpose of consciousness is twofold. One is to absorb from your environment, from your interactions with other people, the opinions and feelings of others and construct yourself. Very interesting idea. The other he calls explicit metacognition, which is established when you ask people, interact with them, and change your self-image. You understand then that how fragile is your identity, how brittle. Here are some of the things that I consider is awareness. We have consciousness in problem solving. When your mother is sick and you have to get medicine and you don't have any money, what do? Altered state of awareness, as some of you were talking about yoga, hypnosis, dream, on. And I write that, activities including hypnosis and meditation, and might have its roots, major roots, in the frontal lobes. So these are some of the things I'll be covering. Hope that they're interesting. There are two kinds of consciousness this guy Ned Block has talked about, and he has become quite famous for talking about it and really arousing a lot of interest. Some people go against him, some people go in favor of him. The previous guy who spoke about ego was perhaps talking about phenomenal consciousness. You don't achieve anything. So you have to have a sense of agency. So these are the two different opinions in our Shastras. But for common people like us, who are not very much convinced by Shastras because there are too many Shastras and we don't know which one to follow, we talk about executive functions. That is, I'll define it later on, but mostly done in the front part of the brain. So here's the definition of the executive function. Deal with information that has been coded by the lower levels from the sensory and perceptual experiences. Remember, by seeing, hearing, touching, on, and have received directed attention. If you don't attend to a perception, attend to a sensation, it would not make any effect on you. Like in Vipassana meditation. What's the idea in Vipassana meditation? One form of Vipassana meditation is to concentrate on your breathing. You just concentrate on how you are breathing. Is it warm? It's cold? Is it changing? Are my nostrils acting up? And then deep down, how do I feel the breathing? On and on. Now, so that's your attention. All you are doing is directing your attention. And when you are directing your attention to sensory perceptual events, you can also direct your attention to plans and making decisions. So attention is really the lever, the key to all sorts of activity. If you are convinced about that, then you believe that something called executive function does exist. What's executive function? We say that elaborate function of logic, which is argument, strategies, planning, problem-solving activity, and the terrible word there, hypothetical deductive system. We put up hypotheses, we deduce, and then we infer. These are the pure elements of executive function. So you have a rough idea now what executive functions are. Now, third. So we haven't ended yet in this bunch of neurologists or neuropsychologists who gave you three functions. At the third level, the highest level of mental activity is represented by consciousness and self-awareness. It's beyond executive function. So, an important function of this highest level of activity is consciousness. What does consciousness do? Is a question that all of us are interested in. What does it do? As I told you, most of the bodily functions can go on without your consciousness at all. And it's for a reason, because if you spend all of our energy in how we digest, how we breathe, then of course you would have no energy left to do higher thinking. So, let's see. There are two kinds of activities we think should be understood. One is reasoning. Okay? The reasoning is the green part that's there in the brain. And then almost opposed to that, or you can say friendly opposition to that, is affect or emotion. And I will mention that later on. Here we come to Indian traditional thinking. The question here we are asking is consciousness physical? Does it have a material basis? That's a big question in Western thoughts on consciousness. Does it have physical basis? Okay? And we go round and round, people ask, does consciousness survive when the person dies? Well, I'm sure each of us has a different answer. What happens to consciousness when you die? Vasmi bhutasya dehasya. Once the body is burnt, everything is lost. So why do you worry about consciousness then? But in traditional Indian thinking, I think the question has been answered. We have an Annamaya kosha that's completely based on nutrition. Pranamaya kosha, breath. Manomaya kosha, you know these things. Mind, mental operation. Vijnanamaya kosha, higher kind of thinking. And then Anandamaya kosha, which is the highest kind of consciousness, where there is only delight, only pleasure. Anandahi khalu bhutani bhavante. From Ananda, the whole entire universe is created.
And lies of their culture will never be
There is a Joan Baez line, be not too hard, for life is short, and nothing is given to man. Okay? Be not too hard when he blindly dies, fighting for things he doesn't own. Isn't it beautiful? So it's talking about self-conscious mind. Actually, both of these guys thought of it, and you can read their book, A Long Conversation Between the Two Guys. Now, the self-conscious mind, the hypothesis is that the self-conscious mind is an independent entity that's actively engaged in reading out the multitude of active centers in the modules of the liaison areas of the dominant cerebral hemisphere. What a long sentence he wrote. The self-conscious mind selects from these centers in accordance with the attention and its interest, and integrates its selection to give the unity of conscious experience from moment to moment. It also acts back on the neural centers. In a sense, this is also a summary of the Buddhist idea of the citta, or cetasika, which changes from moment to moment as consciousness changes. Yet, we feel that consciousness is some entity that is stable. But actually what happens is, every moment consciousness changes. And in West as well as in East, they have support for this. In the West how? Because if you look at the activity of each neural cell, it changes in fractions of seconds, all the time. So if you're a microbiologist, you would say, how does the idea of self come through? And that's why many microbiologists are interested in consciousness. The anesthesiologists want to study consciousness because they tell you, I put people out of consciousnous every day. Where does it go? I ought to know. So, that's why consciousness has become a multidisciplinary interdisciplinary field. We don't have to stick to what we know from the Vedas and Upanishads. We can also go into modern research into consciousness. Like, do people with vegetative states still have consciousness? Or do people with coma still have consciousness? Should we say bad things in their presence? In our Indian tradition we say, even when a person is not listening and is about to die, say Harinam. Say Harinam, Ram Nam, Harinam. Why? Because we believe that there is some semblance of consciousness in the person, even as he is in the last breath of his life. Right? So, we are not too far from a self-conscious mind. So, I suppose this is the British and Buddhist point of view. There is no permanent you or I, is exactly the conclusion of quantum theory. Its best proponent is Hume, the British philosopher. Any object can be adequately described as a bundle of properties, there being no object without the properties that identify it. You think it's Buddhism, but it's written by David Hume. So I say, the one before that. So if there is no personal self beyond our feelings and thoughts, sensations and emotions, moods and predispositions, all of these together is the definition of self. So if there is no object-subject difference, then there is really no problem. There is a fellow who got Nobel Prize, his name is Francis Crick. Some of the people here have worked with one of the disciples of Crick. The guy second from here has been working on it. And Crick said, just as a Hindu philosopher would say, we are always subjective. We only work on representations that are in our mind. I hate you, not because you are you, but what I think of you. So it's all our representations have to be subjective, and then we work on it. It has very deep implications. We work on ideas, not on objects. Okay? So